I like to read, but I mostly read old books. I like the classics. And because of that, I haven't read a lot of newer books. And I want to change that. So when I saw that Goodreads was doing the Goodreads Choice Awards, I figured this is a great way to read a bunch of books that came out this year, although I'm sure a lot of them I'll read next year because it's already December. But it's a good way to discover a bunch of books I wouldn't have read otherwise. Maybe because it's like the most popular things, maybe they're not actually that good and then I can complain about them, or maybe they're all good and I'll just have got to read a bunch of nice books. Who knows? But my plan is I'm going to read almost all of the winners of the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I'm going to write a review once I finish it, and then I'm going to record myself talking about it and put it all together into one big episode of me talking about a bunch of books. So I'm pretty excited to get into it. There's going to be massive spoilers for every book I read because I just want to talk about like anything I like about the book. That's the point. I am not holding back. I'm sure there will be things I forget to mention, but like if you want to read any of these books, you should probably read them before watching what I have to say. Plus, then you'll understand what I'm saying better. But I think really the only thing I want to go over before I just jump into the books and my thoughts is I want to explain which books I am not going to be reading and why. First of all, one of the categories is for audiobooks. So I'm not doing that partially because I don't really feel like just listening to a whole audiobook. I do like audiobooks, but I like to read a physical book better. So I more use an audiobook during the moments where like I can't read a book, but I want to keep making my way through it. So like if I'm driving or something. So I'm not going to do that. Plus a lot of the books from that category are, I can't remember which one won, but a lot of them aren't from this year. So if it's not from this year, I don't want to do it anyway. Although I think Atmosphere might have won, unless I'm going crazy. So it might have been from this year. But either way, I don't really want to do the audiobook. And then the other books are just like, it's just personal preference. Just certain things that either as a Christian or as a person I just didn't particularly want to read about. And at first I was like, but I'm supposed to read all the winners. And then I realized I can read whatever and not read whatever I want. Like I don't need to force myself to read every winner. That's not the point of this. The point is to read a bunch of books I wouldn't have heard about otherwise. So with that being said, the books I will not be reading, I'm not going to read the winner of the romance category, which is Great Big Beautiful Life, because I looked it up and apparently it's very sexual and I'm not particularly interested in that. I'm not going to read the winner of Romantasy, both because I just personally, from what I've heard, am not super interested in the idea of Romantasy. I like romance books. I generally like fantasy. Romantasy sounds weird. It feels like I'm sure there are some good ones, but it seems from what I've heard, it seems like a lot of them are in this middle ground where they're not quite romance and they're not quite fantasy. And I feel like both of those genres are ones where you have to like full send for it to really work. If you're going to have romance be a primary focus of your story, you need to spend all the time developing the relationship and the romance for it to really pay off and not get boring. And if you're going to do fantasy, there's so much like weirdness in fantasy, so much so much fantastical stuff in fantasy that you have to spend so much time developing it to like really bring people into this world. And if you're straddling the line between those two, I feel like you're not really going to properly develop either one. Also, apparently this book or this series has like I looked, it said that there's not that many sex scenes, but they're like pivotal to the plot or something. And again, I just don't really want to read that. Also, this is the third book in a Romantasy series, and I just don't feel like reading 3 books just for this. Like 3 books that I'm not going to be that interested in anyway, probably. I'm not going to read the winner for horror, which is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, because I am not a fan of witchcraft in general. And it doesn't seem like this book is like, witchcraft is good, here's how to do it, but witchcraft is still kind of in a positive light, because it's like, I know that the book is about more than witchcraft. It's more about like women's struggles in the patriarchy and that sort of thing. And in that sense, it does sound interesting. I just don't want to have to read a bunch about witchcraft to get to that message when there are other books that talk about that anyway. And then the last one I'm not going to read is Alchemized, because I looked it up and the AI overview, one of the first terms it used was dark romance, and that is just like an immediate no for me. I don't know how extreme of a dark romance this story is. It might not be that bad, but I know enough about that term to know that I would rather avoid that at all costs. But aside from that, everything looked perfectly fine. So yeah, I've got 10 books to read, and you can hear my thoughts on the first one right now. Okay, so the first book that I read is Sunrise on the Reaping. I don't have the cover for it or whatever, but who cares? It won the young adult fantasy and sci-fi category by a lot, which I kind of figured. I actually started rereading it before the winners were announced because I just like knew it was going to win. I love Suzanne Collins. Like, this book really made me realize that I don't just love the Hunger Games. Suzanne Collins is such a good writer. It like blows me away. Like, I know this might be controversial to say, and I'm definitely, coming from an uneducated place, but it's so crazy to me that books this good still are being made, because I love the classics. I love Jane Austen. My favorite book of all time is The Count of Monte Cristo. Like, there are so many good classic books, and that's a lot of what I read. And so for there to be books that came out this year that are this good, it's just incredible. I'm basically just going to say whatever comes to mind with these books. So I'm sure there will be certain subjects that I want to talk about but just don't think of, and that's okay. It's my video. I can talk about whatever I want, okay? But it's such a good book. I think it might be the best Hunger Games book. I don't know. It kind of feels like a better, arguably better version of Catching Fire, which is kind of like the best of the original trilogy, at least in a lot of people's opinion, because it's got a lot of similar subjects. There's the whole sabotaging the arena thing, and working with previous victors and people like outside of the arena itself. It's basically it feels like a almost a prequel to Catching Fire, which is really cool, because the whole idea and a big thing that comes up in the ending is Haymitch he kind of just didn't, he was a little unlucky and it wasn't the right timing. Like, he did everything he could to sabotage the arena, but they just didn't have all the resources they needed, both in the arena and outside the arena. And so they talk about, like, just someone who's a little luckier and a little better timing could do it. And that's exactly what happens in Catching Fire. Because from this book to Catching Fire, like, Plutarch rises through the ranks, which gives him more power. District 13 gets, like, more involved in things. And definitely, I would imagine they grew in size a lot over those 25 years. And like, those previous victors that helped Haymitch in this book, they're now in the games, which is pretty cool. I'm rewatching the movies right now, and I don't remember if this is in the book, in Catching Fire the book, but in the movie it's Plutarch's idea to have all the victors go back into the arena. I don't think that's in the book because it wouldn't make sense, because it's meant to be a surprise, but I imagine that a lot of those scenes between Plutarch and Snow are, I don't know how involved Suzanne Collins was, but I imagine that they're like canon. Like, that's what Suzanne Collins imagines was happening in the book. She just couldn't write it for the sake of, like, plot twists and whatnot. And so you can see, like, how Plutarch was very involved in this plan. And that's another thing I love about Sunrise on the Reaping, is that we get this backstory for Plutarch. Because, like, we learn a little bit about if I remember right, we learn a little bit about the Heavensby family in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but Plutarch himself is not alive yet. I think, because he's like a similar. He's older than Haymitch, but I don't think he's alive, or at the very least, he's pretty young. Would be young at the time in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So it's really cool to see this backstory. To He's a really interesting character. I like the way that I like at the end when he says, I'm no one's idea of a hero, but at least I'm still in the game." Because I think that's a very good description of his character. Like it's hard to know whether to like him or not, whether to trust him or not, and we do like him and trust him at least somewhat because of Catching Fire, but it's hard to tell where he's at in this book. But he gives a lot of interesting points, and that's another big subject that I want to talk about with this book that Plutarch is very involved in. Is every Hunger Games book kind of focuses on some different aspect of social commentary related to like government and dictatorship and all these sorts of things. And this book specifically, I think I remember hearing about an interview where Suzanne Collins said, like, the way that she writes these books is first she thinks about what social commentary she wants to make, and then she starts writing the story or something like that. And so this book, a big part of it is about it's all about propaganda and like brainwashing. There's so much capital propaganda that gets discussed. Haymitch constantly brings up the idea of like painting your own poster and not letting the capital paint its posters with their blood and that sort of thing. And Haymitch brings up some really interesting questions when like there are those moments where, so I meant Plutarch. I think I said Haymitch. Plutarch brings up some really interesting points and questions with like there's that moment where the tributes all have knives in the training center, and they probably could have taken down the peacekeepers, but they didn't. And Plutarch is like, why didn't you do it? Because you totally could have. And he says that like he doesn't think the fear that the capital inspires in its citizens is enough to fully explain and validate why they don't do anything to rebel. And it's a really interesting discussion of like the way propaganda works on the mind, and how like these people know it's terrible, but they're still, something in them stops them from like rebelling. And you see that again when there's the game makers in the arena, which by the way is such a cool like plot point, such an interesting idea, like that I never would have thought of that. To have the game makers show up in the arena, it's like this crazy, it's almost like a fourth wall break. Like it's so interesting. And then like the way and then the tributes killing them, it's a lot like when Snow goes into the arena in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but it's later. This is 40 years down the line, so you'd think that things would have changed a lot with like how the arena works, and they have, but it's still interesting that they actually sent game makers in there, and that I think is, you know, primarily because of what Haymitch does to sabotage the arena. But it's such a cool story. Suzanne Collins is really, really good at the actual like Hunger Games themselves. Like the ideas, they're so cool. The first Hunger Games, the arena being the woods basically, is just like, that's such a smart idea because that's where Katniss is really comfortable, and so it's going to be a really interesting area for her character. So even though the arena itself isn't the most interesting of the arenas, I would say honestly, I mean, unless you count the one from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, those two are kind of the least interesting, I guess. Although I think the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes one is really interesting because of how different it is from what we're used to in the later books, or you know, the earlier books that come later. But the first arena in the first book is really cool. The arena in Catching Fire is still the coolest arena. It being a clock and like each section does a different thing is so, that's awesome. There's so many great moments from that arena. But in this arena, the 50th anniversary is so cool. The whole idea, like, I know we heard about some of this in the older books, but it's still super cool to actually be there. The whole idea that it's like this beautiful arena where everything is deadly. Every part of the arena that gets added and revealed is so interesting and so cool. Um, and there's so many, like, this is probably like the most, probably the darkest book in the series, with both with moments like Luella's death, like things that happen outside of the arena. There's some really upsetting and dark moments, but also in the arena there's it's some of those like fight scenes are probably the most violent they've been. And there's just like there's so many like young helpless people that die in this story more than any of the other stories. Luella is so heartbreaking. I don't know that I can handle seeing that in the movie. But like she's basically Rue but for Haymitch. Um and that's another thing I love. Luella and Haymitch is it's so sweet, and it's so sad because that's how you know that it's a really like well written, well developed relationship, is that Luella honestly dies pretty early in the book, and I am still devastated by it. Like, to get me to care that much about Luella in that short amount of time that we know her says a lot about Suzanne's abilities in writing and like character creation. Um, but even more than that, the whole reveal of how Luella is Haymitch's sweetheart, and it completely changes our view of Haymitch and Katniss. Because in the original books, when Haymitch calls Katniss sweetheart, it is meant to feel very condescending. Like, we're not supposed to like Haymitch. He's like drunk all the time. He's rude and very condescending and all these things. And so the sweetheart just kind of adds to it. But through this, we realize that even though he's saying it in kind of a condescending tone, it's because Katniss reminds him so much of Luella. And so and also because Katniss is the daughter of Astrid and Burdock. And so it completely changes the view of Haymitch and Katniss's relationship, especially knowing that, I mean, at that point he's almost like, in sort of an uncle, like godfather type position. Like that's basically what it would be if if Haymitch hadn't pushed her parents away. So that definitely says a lot. It's a very, very powerful part of the story. What else is there to say? It's just I loved it. I'm gonna do my rating on like the Goodreads scale, because that's where these came from. So I would definitely give this a 5 out of 5 stars. It is a great book. I think it might be the best book in the Hunger Games series. It's fine if you don't agree with me, but if you do, I'd love to hear about it. It's so good. It's a book that I feel like you could really enjoy even if you haven't read the other books, but reading other books just adds so much to it. And I think that's really cool in a prequel, when it's written in that way, where you don't need the context. It just makes the story even more interesting. And it's just, I mean, it's great. Another thing I really like is, I feel like in the original Hunger Games book, with specific series, trilogy, boom, specifically with President Snow, what makes him scary is we don't know much about him or what he's capable of. And so throughout the trilogy, we slowly learn about him, and we've got these looming threats without knowing what he can truly do. And so that's what makes him scary, and Suzanne Collins really effectively utilizes that fear. While by the time we're at this book, we have seen what Snow is capable of. We know he's super evil, and so instead of trying to present Snow's, like, what Snow can do in the same way, I feel like this book goes in a different direction. And instead, we get that fear of what Snow can do because we already know what he's capable of, and because of that, Snow is can be more vague in his threats. Um, and part of the fear comes also like that we know things that Hamish doesn't, and so we're more afraid for him. And so I think Snow really, or I think Suzanne Collins really effectively utilizes those different ways to create that fear based on our amount of knowledge. Um, I loved seeing the victors come back, BT and Mags and Wyrus. That was great. That was really cool. I am like obsessed with Lenore Dove's death. It's so smart. It's so good because there's a lot of moments in this story where you know what's going to happen, you just don't know how it's going to happen, and that's or when, and that's when where like the fear comes from. Like obviously Luella's going to die, but we don't know how, we don't know when, and so it's still like devastating when it happens. And then when like Hamish picks up her body and runs with it, like that is such a powerful moment. We know like Maisie and Wyatt are gonna have to die, Lulu's gonna have to die, Ampert has to die. Like there are so many characters who have to die. They're going to die just based on how the book work, how books in general work, what we know about Snow, like all these things. We know these characters have to die, but we don't know when or how. And there's so many moments like that, not just with deaths. And but Lenore Dove's death is so good because we know she's going to die because she's not alive in the trilogy. But we don't know anything about it. And so for it to happen, it happens in the most devastating possible way because we know that Snow is really good at like getting in people's heads, at doing things that are going to absolutely devastate them, that are going to like ruin their lives. He is so good at doing that. And so it had to be something devastating, but I couldn't think of like what would make the most sense. And so for Hamish to essentially have caused her death by feeding her the poison is so upsetting and so powerful, and it's the like perfect way to have done that. It's crazy. So yeah, this is a great book. If you liked the Hunger Games series, I would totally recommend reading it. If you haven't read the Hunger Games series, you could just read it and you'd probably mostly be fine. You might want to look some things up, but you'd mostly be okay. But I think it's so good, and the whole series is so good that it's worth reading all the other books just to get to this one. I keep looking off the side because I just have it sitting on my piano keyboard. I'm going to set it in front of me so that I stop doing that. I'll glance down instead. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all I really have to say about this book that I can think of right now. Well, I guess one more thing. I like the idea of the newcomers. It's cool that like no one had really thought of that before, and it doesn't happen in the original trilogy either. Of like everybody that's not the careers banding up against the careers. That two-sidedness is pretty cool. So I enjoyed that a lot. But yeah, this was an incredible book. I definitely recommend reading it. It was a great start to the Goodreads Choice Awards reading and reviewing. I am not totally sure what book I'm going to read next, but I guess you'll find out in just a second. Welcome to my grandparents' bedroom. I know it looks like there's an angel behind me about to take me to heaven, but it's just their light. I am here to talk to you about fake skating. Also, as I just mentioned, I'm at my grandparents' house, and there are many people here, so there may or may not be background noise, but as long as it's not too distracting, I don't want to have to record this again. Fake skating was the winner. I think it was just like the young adult fiction, like it wasn't anything too specific. It was way better than I expected. I kind of thought it, like, especially looking at the cover with this like cartoony thing, it made me think of Icebreaker. And not that I read that, but it made me think of it. Kind of reminded me of that, and I
was worried it would be something similar, just like a book talk type thing. Not that all book talk books are bad, but like a lot of it's not really something that aligns with my interest, with like spicy books and dark romance and whatever. Like that's not my thing. But I do like romance novels. I love Jane Austen. Um, so I've been wanting to read modern romance novels, and this was actually a great introduction to it. Um, I mean, what do I even say about it? It was just a nice, light, fluffy romance book. A lot of the books I read are like the classics, or even if you just the previous book I talked about, Sunrise on the Reaping, it is a modern book, but it has a lot of social commentary, and it talks about like, an overbearing government, that sort of thing. Um, Whereas this book is not so much about the social commentary. So it's different than what I typically like to read, but it was a very enjoyable read. It was a great story. I cared a lot about like the relationship, and I mean the ending was good. I don't know. I read the whole book in a day, and it was a nice little. I'm in the middle of reading Crime and Punishment, so it's just like a little diversion from that. I kind of went in the exact opposite direction, but it was a good book. I kind of didn't like either character at the start. At the beginning of the book, I just like was not that into it. First of all, it switches perspectives between the two characters, and I feel like there's certain, like in romance, I feel like generally it's better to stick to one character. It can depend, for sure, but I like the idea of like just sticking to one character, because then you don't know the other character's thoughts, and it makes it a lot more interesting. But I think in this book, Lynn Painter does very effectively use the our knowledge of both characters' thoughts to make the story more interesting. There were certain moments where I could tell that like the chapter needed to, I was like, I figured when I turned the page it was probably going to be the end of the chapter, because I knew that we were going to need to get the other character's perspective on the same situation. And so in that way it actually was kind of cool. There's definitely music going on back there, but I'm going to keep going. So yeah, it was. I mean, I feel like I don't have a ton to say, but I did enjoy it. If you like romance novels, especially if you like modern romance novels, I think this is a very good one. There was a lot of swearing, a lot of unnecessary swearing. I'm someone who can handle swearing, but I don't necessarily like it. So I get the point is that Alec, the main guy in this story, is an 18-year-old boy, 18-year-old man, I guess, whatever. And so he like swears a lot unnecessarily. Like I get it's supposed to be unnecessary, but that doesn't make it more enjoyable for me. Um, but it didn't like ruin the book or anything. I like how Danny like didn't really swear. That contrast was cool. How it wasn't just like how Lynn Painter didn't just decide, well, teenagers swear. She actually used it as a way to provide a clear difference in the narration between the two characters. I thought that was kind of nice. There were some moments where I was worried it was gonna get into like spicy territory, like that. I think sex in books is generally pretty unnecessary. I know that some books that's kind of the point, like people read it because they want to read like the sex scenes or whatever, and I'm not really gonna comment on that right now, but that's not my thing. I think when you're focusing on plot, sex is very rarely necessary unless it's if it's a book about like The Color Purple, that I think the sex related things that happen in that book are important to the book, because a big part of it is about that trauma and that sexual violence and all those sorts of things. So in that way, I think that can be necessary. But when it's just like thrown in because it's like, oh well, people like to read about sex, it's like I don't. So there were a few moments where I was worried it was going to get there, but then it didn't, and it didn't even really get close to that. So I appreciated that. The intimate moments were written in a way that felt very intimate, but I also wasn't like too worried. Overall, I wasn't too worried that like about where it was going. So I thought it was very well written. It was written just in a way that was descriptive enough that I could kind of put myself in that situation and be like, wow, I can't wait till that's me or whatever, but not descriptive enough to where it's gross. Because even something kind of simple like kissing, if you go into too much detail, it's a little icky. So that was cool. Uh, Overall, I don't really have any like complaints about this book. It was other than maybe a little bit too much swearing, but whatever. Um, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was good. The one other thing I will talk about, because I kind of mentioned how it's different from like the classics and those sort of things that I usually like to read with like social commentary, is in the review I wrote for this book. And I'm probably not the only person to ever say this ever, because every combinations of words has been said by somebody, right? But I sort of more or less coined this term that I really like, that I call uniquely profound. And so this is a book that I would say is not uniquely profound. And the example I gave, I know it's kind of a big switch up from this book, but if you know about the book Lolita by Nabokov, it's a book from the perspective of a pedophile. That book is uniquely profound because it provides a unique experience and is uniquely powerful. The impact it leaves on you is unique to that book. It doesn't necessarily make you think of all the other things you've read like that. It makes you think of that specific book. And so a lot of books are uniquely profound. The Hunger Games is uniquely profound because the concept of the Hunger Games themselves has never been done before. And then utilizing that concept to then comment on government and the problems with government and all these sorts of things, that is a unique method of doing so. Fake Skating is just a romance story about two high schoolers, one of whom plays a sport and one of whom is like a nerdy girl who likes to read books, and they fall in love, and drama happens, and then it's all okay in the end. That has been done a billion times. It's not unique, but just because a book isn't uniquely profound doesn't mean it can't be profound, because in writing a romance novel, you still have to capture a lot of real aspects of the human experience. There are a lot of things in this book that we all go through, that we all deal with in some way, even if it's not in the same way as in this book. So even though this kind of story, has been done many, many other times, the topic that it covers and the way it covers it still is profound, just not in a unique way. So I'm not saying, I want to be clear that it's not that this book doesn't have any merit to it. It's not that the book isn't profound at all. It's just that the way that it's profound, the way it's presented, and the impact it leaves on you is not specifically unique to this book. But that's not a problem. Like, it's still a great book. I really enjoyed reading it, and if you read mostly for escapism, this is a good book for you. Like, if you're reading specifically for like that romance with social commentary, read Jane Austen. But if you just want a nice sweet romance to occupy a few hours of your day or something, this is a good choice. So I mean, that's really all I have to say. So far, both the books I've read from the Goodreads Choice Award have been great, and I hope it stays that way. But honestly, at this point, I have no idea what book I'm going to read next. But let's find out. At this point, I might just record each book review in like a different room to be consistent with this. But I am now in my parents' bedroom. I have my I Eat Cement shirt on. All thanks to my cousin. I also am holding the microphone in my left hand this time in honor of the main character of this book. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, I'm about to tell you. So this book is Not Quite Dead Yet. It's the winner of the mystery and slash thriller, or mystery and thriller, I don't remember what it was, category. When I first heard about it, I had some hope. I thought it might be a little weird when it was like she solves her own murder because that was all I knew. But it's not like weird like ghost stuff, which honestly could have been cool too. But she's just like basically this girl. She gets attacked on Halloween, and somebody tries to kill her, and she doesn't die, but because of the injuries, within a week she's going to die of a fatal aneurysm. So she decides she's going to spend this week figuring out who her killer is. Um, I think some of these books I'm gonna try not to spoil too much, but this is one that I'm just gonna tell you what happens. So if you want to read this one, then read it before listening to this. But that kind of goes for all of this. Like, if you're watching this video, you're probably okay with spoilers at this point, especially after the last two books I talked about. I didn't really hold back that much. So, when this book started off, I kind of had the same impression I did with Fake Skating, but oh, I just switched to my right hands. Sorry, Jet. I had the same impression with Fake Skating, but I knew to give it a chance, where I didn't really like any of the characters. And then it occurred to me, I was like, wait a minute, she's going to be solving her own murder. I'm not supposed to like these people. They're setting them up to be suspects. But I didn't really like Jet either, but that's okay, because just like in Fake Skating, she redeems herself a lot throughout the book. And for that reason, I think Jet is a very good, flawed character. She is not great to people. She still, lives with her parents at 27, which is not a bad thing, but it's because she hasn't really committed to anything. She gives up on things a lot. So she's not like the most, she's definitely not a role model. But that just makes her growth throughout the story more powerful. Um, so her family is messy. Like, oh my goodness, the drama is insane, and I'm here for it. It was a very intriguing plot device. There was a lot of fighting over everything. They can't agree on anything. They blame everyone for everything, and it's crazy. And throughout the book, we learn that there's a lot of reasons for this. There's an affair. There's a previous murder that was covered up, and all sorts of things. Like, it's crazy. There's so much stuff. The mystery itself, before I talk about some of the specific plot points, the mystery itself is not that much of a mystery. If you are like decently knowledgeable in how mysteries tend to work, you can put the pieces together pretty quickly. Like, basically every time a new piece of evidence was presented, I immediately knew where it was going. Before the characters figured it out. But what I appreciate is the characters figured the things out pretty quickly too. Like, it took them some time. They had to do some more searching and some more thinking, and maybe they had to get a different suspect out of the way first. But it usually didn't take them too long to make the logical connections for what the evidence meant, and that was good for like the reading experience, because the worst mysteries are the ones where you immediately know what a piece of evidence means, but they don't get like they just suddenly have an epiphany like 200 pages later, and they're like, oh, this is what it means. It's like, yeah, I knew this the whole time. Like, that's annoying, and I'm glad that didn't happen in this story. But I will say, the person who was the murderer, like who it gets revealed to be in the very end, um I knew who it was like pretty early on. There was like a moment really early on where I was like, it's him. Now there were other possible suspects. I didn't want to like rule anybody out, because a big part of mystery writing is you need to have that obvious person, um so then it cannot be them to be a surprise. And then when that became a common enough thing, then you have the not obvious person who becomes obvious because you know how mysteries work. And so then that not obvious person is actually the main suspect, and you can utilize that to then have them not be it either. And then it's actually a surprise to the reader. But in this case, the not obvious person kind of was who it was. But I never was 100% certain it was him, but I kind of knew. Um, So, with that being said, I will sort of explain some of the plot now and talk about my thoughts on some of the characters. So, the main character is Jet. She's 27 years old. She still lives with her parents. She dropped out of college. I don't think she currently has a job. All she always says her like catchphrase, or at least what her mom says her catchphrase is that like she'll do things later. Um, she never really finishes anything. She has ideas and then doesn't complete them. She doesn't go through with it. So, not in a great spot. She has an older brother, Luke. She had an even older sister, Emily, but she drowned when she was 16 in an accident where her long hair got caught in the drain of their pool. And then she has a mom and a dad. So, it's Luke, mom, and dad. Luke is 30. He has a wife, Sophia, and Sophia is married to Luke. Uh, Obviously, because I said it was his wife. That was not what I was going to say. Sophia used to be Jet's best friend, and then they went off to college. They didn't really hear anything from each other, and then Sophia marries Luke. They both seem to think the other person stopped contact first, but it never gets cleared up what actually happened because it's not really that relevant to the story. And I appreciate that. I like stories where sometimes there's things that are important to like a character's relationship but never fully get revealed, because in life we don't always have the answers to everything. So I think give the answers to a lot of the big things that are the reason we're reading the book in the first place, and then some of the smaller things don't always need answers, and that makes the story feel more real. So there's Sophia. Luke and Sophia have a son. I think his name's Cameron, if I remember right. He's like 1 year old or something, maybe a little younger. Um, whew, there's a there's police people. There's all kinds of like suspects and stuff. Um, so Jet gets attacked, and then she has 1 week. She fights with her parents, and so she goes to live with her friend Billy, she used to be best friends with. And Billy's great. I love Billy. He's pretty much what you consider like a golden retriever boyfriend minus the boyfriend. Um, he's been in love with Jet forever, and he's a great character. He's a great addition to the story. He kind of balances out the negative sides of Jet. Um, and like gives you a character to like really root for, that like is gonna survive, or at least you hope is gonna survive. Ooh, does he? Let's find out. But yeah, Billy's great. I feel like I had more I was gonna say. Oh yeah, and I like the way that they do the romance in this story, because it's not really meant to be a romance. It's a mystery, but every story has to have romance in it, or else why are you even reading it, right? Um, so I think the romance is really good because they don't write it like a romance for the most part. And by they I mean the author Holly Jackson. She doesn't write it much like a romance. Like it'll be like his hand grazed hers as he did whatever, but it's not like it doesn't go in depth about like her reaction to it and how it makes her feel and the butterflies in her stomach or whatever. It just like says the things happen, and then we have enough knowledge about romance, or at least have read enough romance books, that we can fill in the gaps ourselves. And so in that way it has this romance in the story, and we see the way it develops without it being like in your face or distracting from the main point of the story, which is the mystery. So I thought that was very well done. And then in the end, I'm just trying to think if there's any important middle bits to discuss before the end, but I don't know that there really is, because I don't need to give a whole rundown of the plot. If you want the whole rundown, just like read it yourself or read a summary or something. But there's so much stuff that gets revealed. Like there's all this now, and there's this tax fraud too, and Sophia, Luke's wife, is poisoning Luke's dad with salt because he has bad kidneys and can't have salt or something. And like, oh my goodness, there's so much. It is like the messiest family I have ever seen. It's insane. Um, but in the end, turns out Billy, his dad, the police officer who's been like really nice and really helpful to Jet this whole time, he's the one that killed Jet. Um, because he had an affair with Jet and Luke's mom, and so Luke is actually his son. And so then, like, we find out all these other details that when Emily died, it wasn't an accident. It was actually Luke drowned her because she said something about how Luke wasn't even really part of the family. But he didn't find out who his dad was. He just was told by Emily, and Luke got mad and drowned her. And then Luke's actual dad, who's also Billy's dad, like comes over and to check on them and sees that Luke drowned Emily, and he's like, "Well, you're my son, so I'm gonna help you." He doesn't actually tell him he's his son, but he's like, "I'm gonna help you." So he gets in the water and he makes it look like it was an accident and that her hair got caught in the drain, and then he like does all this stuff to cover. And if you've read the book, the moment where they're reading Billy's mom's like journals, and it gets to the part where it says like he was already wet before, I like, even though I knew what was coming, like even though I'd kind of figured things out, I still like I gasped when I read that. Like that was such a good reveal, just the way it was written and everything. I really liked that. But in the end, um, I really like the way it ended. First of all, I like that Jed actually died. There's so many stories where it says where you're told the character's gonna die in the beginning, and that's like the entire driving force of the plot, and then in the end they don't die. And like that's okay sometimes. Honestly, while she was dying, I was like, I kind of wished that they were gonna throw in some plot twist and she wasn't gonna die, because it made me sad. I didn't cry because I'm a real man. I don't cry at words. I actually have in the past, but not at this book. But I didn't cry. But it was still sad. And then as soon as it was done, I was like, oh yeah, I'm glad she actually died. Which sounds bad, but it's good for the plot. So I'm glad she died. I also think it's really powerful and an interesting plot point. Like, I like the way it was written that she actually dies before they figure out who the murderer was. She thinks it's Billy when she dies, and so he says like, yes, you're right, you got me, just so that she'll have that feeling of satisfaction as she dies. But she realizes it's not him, and she's like, no, you don't have to lie. And then Billy goes and accuses his own dad, and then Luke is there, and Luke shoots Billy's dad and kills him, and that's the end of the book. It's kind of a very very dramatic ending. I was worried on like the last page of the book. I thought that Billy was gonna jump in front of his dad and like take the bullets for him. I'm so glad that didn't happen. Like, if Billy died for his dad, that would honestly, that would suck. I would have complained about that. But it didn't. And I don't mind that Billy's dad dies. I think there's other ways it could have gone that also would have been good, but I am honestly perfectly fine with Billy's dad dying. Not a great guy. So I think that's the specific plot points I'll talk about. I don't need to get into everything, but it was a very nice story. I thought it was well written. I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning. It's already been 14 minutes. How am I supposed to remember what I said back then? But I would give this 4 out of 5 stars. It was a good story, just not quite 5 out of 5 stars. It didn't quite blow me away that much. Maybe if the mystery was more of a surprise, maybe if I don't even know. It's just one of the big differences between a 4-star book and a 5-star book for me is how likely I am to continue to bring it up in future like literary discussions and to continue to think about the book. And this is a book that I liked, but I'm not going to be super likely to talk about all the time. Whereas the previous 2 books I talked about, I've already brought them up in plenty of book discussions since. And so I think they deserve that 5 stars. So this is technically the lowest rated book so far, but it was still very good. Shockingly, these award-winning books are not bad. I also might have used that joke in the beginning of this. I can't remember. So I really should just wrap things up at this point. Yeah, I kind of spoiled a lot, but I would still recommend reading it if you're interested. Sometimes books like this are fun. Even if you know the end result, it's still fun to see the journey it takes to get there. Like, I watched the movie. I need to read the book. I own the book, but I watched the movie for Murder on the Orient Express. And even though I already knew the big reveal that it was everybody, because, like, I mean, that's such a famous story, it was still interesting to see the way it got there. So I think this can be one of those books, especially because it's a bit more obvious where it's going. You kind of, sort of know where it's going early on. Um, I think knowing the ending isn't too big of a spoiler, and you'll care about the ending even if you know the ending already. You'll care about it more if you read it and then get there yourself. So I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got the opportunity to read this. I think Holly Jackson did a great job writing this book, and it was a pretty intense read. All things considered. The next book I'm going to read, I'm not totally sure, but I think it's going to be The Compound, which is a very interesting concept. So let's just get right to that.
For this book, I'm in the study room at my dorm, except that our floor doesn't have a study room, so it's just a regular room that we use to study. So there's going to be these blue lights behind me because I didn't feel like turning them off. If you can't tell, I have a different microphone. It's mostly meant for instruments, but I'm going to use it for this anyway. Mostly just has really good gain, so you can hear me without hearing a bunch of other noises, which should be nice. I think I said that the next book was going to be The Compound, but I lied. It's actually My Friends by Frederick Backman. I'm planning to read The Compound next, but who knows? Um, this book I placed on hold a while ago, and I was at like spot 21, and it just ended up moving really fast, and so I got the book a lot sooner than I expected. My I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. And my review for it, I think I'm planning to link all my reviews in the description. My review is very short, but I'm going to try to say more for this. But I still probably won't have a ton to say. It's a book. It's one of those books that's more about the characters and like the way they interact than it is about the plot itself. So it's not really a book that you can easily like summarize or review like with words. You kind of just have to read the actual book, but it was really, really good. It definitely takes like an emotional toll to read. Part of the reason why, like, when I finished the book, I was pushing really hard to try to finish it that day because I was just like, I don't want to keep being sad every day from reading this. But it was a really good book because my friend was like, you should just stop reading it. And I was like, no, I need to finish. It's good. And I want to talk about it here. It's sad, sort of. I, in my review, I like the way I put it. I said it's devastating, but it's also devastatingly hopeful. There's a lot of positive to it in spite of all the bad that happens, and that almost hurts just as much to see like the way they push through everything. Um, yeah, it's written in a really interesting way. That was definitely the first thing I noticed. When I started the first chapter, I was like, this writing style is really weird, and I didn't think I was gonna like it. And by the end of the first chapter, I was like, okay, I need to read the rest of this book. So it won me over very quickly. It's just like it's possible there's other books like this that I haven't read, but it was a very different experience for me. It's pretty like straight to the point with a lot of what it says, but also pretty poetic, which was a really like it was a very new combination for me because I feel like generally when like with poetic writing, it's sort of intentionally vague so that you have to fill in the rest yourself. But with when it's combined with this more straightforward approach, it was a really interesting dynamic. Everything's kind of explained, and some of it is left to the reader to understand, but it's it's a lot of explanation, which fits the story itself, because the actual like in the moment I'm trying present time like plot takes place over 3 days or so. Like it's just a couple days. Um, because they're basically the whole time they're just like on a train or in a house or behind a church, like talking about the past. And that's basically the whole thing. Is it's not really about what's happening in the present. It's about all these stories from the past, but then when it cuts back to the present, those stories give new context to the experience that they're currently having and the dynamic between the two like kind of main characters of this story, Louisa and Ted, is really interesting because Ted is like 40 and Louisa's 18. Um, and Ted has gone through like so much as a child, and now Louisa is kind of actively going through that and sort of just barely like getting past that point. Um, and so they can relate to each other, but like they're also in very different places at that point in time. And so it's a really interesting dynamic, and it's really cool to see the way it develops throughout the story and like as they get to know each other better by, talking about their past. Um, I think it's cool to see like just how much Ted tells her about his past in the story. It I feel like it shows that like he really needed someone to talk to about this. And so when he finally found someone who could kind of understand the things he's been through, I think it helped him a lot because I would bet that he hasn't gone to like therapy or anything. Uh so he's probably never really talked about it much. Because that's one thing I could see people thinking like it's maybe a bit unrealistic how much he tells her. But given the situation, which like I don't want to explain too much because I want you to read the book. But be warned that you need to prepare yourself to for a lot of emotional weight. But if you're willing to go through that, it's definitely worth reading. But it's it's really good. Um, all of the characters are really interesting in their own way because they all have different struggles. There's, it's most of it's family related, but there's alcoholism, there's abuse, there's like so many different struggles. Um, but it doesn't feel like it covers too broad of a scope of things. It just all connects together. Like each character's experience helps you understand the other character's experiences in the ways that they can relate to each other despite having different struggles, and also the way each character kind of sees the things that they've been taking for granted by seeing what other families don't have. And one thing I will say is some of the characters, like some of the family members that like are not very good, they do have growth. Honestly, like all of them. There's so much it's like every character, whether it's one of the main like kids or their family members, has some sort of growth and development by the end of the story, and it's really cool to see, and it doesn't feel unrealistic. Like after going through so much of the story of just all the learning about all these different like bad things that happened and the good that happened during that, but all these bad things that were done by like these family members, and then at the end they start to change. If it's not done correctly, it could be kind of jarring. It could feel unearned. But the book spends so long with like these main teenagers about showing how they're misunderstood and how like people are complicated. And so then when you think about it, like you've got these older adults and like the older brother that's like way older. um they've been alive for so much longer, and so that complication has had so much more time to take effect and to take over who they are, that it's hard to see the good side of them. But that doesn't mean it was never there. Even the absolute worst character of this story, which is Jor's dad, he is like a horrible person, and he should still be seen that way by the end. But the reveal of like what happens to him, um, toward the end of his life is really interesting to see that like development and that change. And it doesn't. absolve him of everything he did, but it still shows you, like, just like everyone else, he is a complicated person. And that doesn't make him a good person, but it does make him human. And that's really the biggest thing is this book is a reminder of what it means to be human. Every character has their own issues, their own struggles, and they're all equally human. And it's a reminder that we are not worse for our struggles. We are not lesser for the things we go through. They don't define us. They they can shape us, but that doesn't mean we have no control over, what that shape becomes, if that makes sense. Um, like our experiences shape us, but we can also shape those experiences. Um, but it was overall a really really good experience. One thing I will spoil because it's not like a huge deal, but the ending reveals that Ted, who is telling the story to Louisa throughout most of the book, um, it reveals that Ted is the one that wrote this book, canonically. And that's why it's called My Friends, is because it was written by Ted, which actually makes sense considering the way it was written. Because a lot of when the story itself is told, it's not actually like in quotation marks like Ted saying it, it's just like the narrator. So that makes sense. But I honestly, when it's done right, I love endings like that. Like, it's not, Frederick Backman's not the first person to ever be like, but actually, this book was written by one of the characters. But I love when that's done right. It was such a cool, like, little reveal at the end. It makes so much sense. It's such a great conclusion for his character arc, for him to take these experiences and turn it into this book. That it's just it's beautiful. And it just I don't know how many more ways I can say this book was a really good experience. I would probably wait a long time before reading it again because it's very heavy, but I would definitely be willing to come back to it. It's definitely a book that I will be happy to discuss in the future, and I would say this is definitely, like, I mean, I loved Sunrise on the Reaping, and Fake Skating is a very fun book, but this is definitely the best book I've read so far from the Goodreads Choice Awards. So I think the next one will be The Compound, but maybe I'll surprise you again, and you're going to find out right now. All right, book number 5, and I am finally actually in my dorm room for this one. I figured out that if I make my screen just like zoomed in on a picture of a black square, then there's no glare bars. So I'm just gonna do that, which means I don't know, I can't see what's going on, but that's okay. I read The Compound, finally. This was a surprisingly good book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I would say like it was a high four. With some of the other books I read recently, it kind of like giving this a 4 out of 5 stars kind of made me question my ratings on the other ones, but I think I stick by everything. I just before reading this one, I read The Fault in Our Stars, which I'm sorry, I did not like it very much, but I'm not going to get into that here. Maybe I can talk about it in a different episode. But I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I consider it was close to 2 out of 5, but I went with three. But like I was like, if this is a four, then The Fault in Our Stars should be a two. And then also, if this is a four, then why is Fake Skating a five? But I stand by. I think Fake Skating is still a five, and I already talked about that. So let's actually talk about The Compound. One thing I noticed is The Compound has decently like lower average ratings than the other books I've reviewed so far. It's like a average of 3.57 out of 5 stars, and I think a big reason for that is a lot of people didn't know what they were getting into, like going into the book, which is the same boat I was in. All I really knew about it was it was something with, there's some sort of like romance, like dating reality show, like a Love Island type of thing. And then it sounded like the world was like falling apart or something, and there were like these tasks they had to do to get rewards, and they progressively get more dangerous. And so I assumed it was going to be sort of like that horror movie Truth or Dare, where it's like if they give you a dare, and they like progressively get more like all the I don't, if you know what I'm talking about. It's like the people just randomly, they get like this massive grin on their face, and it's like super cheesy. I haven't actually seen the movie, I just know about it. It's like this super cheesy grin, and they're like truth or dare, and if you say dare, then you like have to do something dangerous, and then it like progressively gets more dangerous. um Anyway, so I sort of pictured something like that, where it was like, oh, at first you just gotta like kiss somebody, but now you've gotta stab them 3 times or whatever. Um, but that's not what it was, and I think that's why a lot of people maybe didn't like it as much. Is uh, it was kind of maybe advertised to the wrong group. Like the people that are looking for Love Island, but they kill each other, came to this book, and the people that actually would be interested in what the book really is, didn't think they would be. Which is why, like, otherwise, I probably wouldn't have read this book. So I'm glad that I got to read it. Now I will actually explain what's going on in the book, instead of being incredibly vague about it. Uh, Essentially, it's almost like I would describe it as a dystopian novel that just takes place in our present world because it's already dystopian enough. So it's just the like regular world. There's like a lot of wars going on, but aren't there already wars going on? So like it really is just the regular world, and then people get to come on this show, and there are 10 women and 10 men, and they live on this in this nice house like land area in the middle of a desert called the compound. And they're constantly being watched because it's on television. um they have to do these tasks to get rewards. So there's like communal tasks where everybody in the group has to do something. So it might be like everyone share your phobia, or later on it's like everybody kiss all the other residents. um and they get a reward, and it's sometimes it's random stupid stuff, like you get a whistle. um but sometimes it's stuff they desperately need, like uh it'll be meat or water or something. But what happens then is, if it's something really important, sometimes the task will be to banish somebody from the compound, so they're like out of the game. um they're off the show. And the way that it works is there are 5 beds, and or no, sorry, 10 beds. And so there's 10 beds, and there's 10 guys and 10 girls. And so every guy and girl have to find somebody to share a bed with. That doesn't inherently mean anything sexual, but at times it does. That's one thing that I didn't like. I intentionally went into this book without knowing anything. It is a little bit sexual because of the subject. Like it's meant to be like a Love Island type of thing, and from I've never watched the show, but from my understanding, that's a big part of what it is. It's like a bunch of just hot people. Like anyway, um, so it's a little bit sexual in plot, but it's not graphic there for the most part. Um, it's just like used as a plot point on occasion. But it's more just like they mention like, oh, you thought this guy loved you, but he slept with this other person. Oh my goodness, it's not like anything too bad, but still like something to be cautious of going into this. Uh, but anyway, so they do these tasks, they get rewards, they banish people. And in order to when someone gets banished, then there is an uneven number of, or like a different amount of boys to girls. So if you don't have a bedmate at when it's by the morning, then you get eliminated. So like if a girl gets eliminated, then there's 9 girls and 10 guys. So the 10 guys, one of them is not going to have a bedmate. So for the rest of that day and that night, they're going to try really hard to find somebody to be their bedmate because people can even move around like in the middle of the night. It what matters is in the morning if like when the sun rises, who's alone. And so that's a big point of tension. But also, people are actually forming relationships and falling in love and whatever. Um, so it's not the tasks, and then there's also personal tasks. I'll explain that first. The personal tasks, they're not supposed to tell anyone else what they are, and you just do them and you get a reward for yourself. Now, obviously, you have the option to share them with other people once you have your reward, but like you get a personal reward. And so you might get like a hair dryer or something. And as the game goes on, and the more people that get eliminated, the better the rewards are. So the whole idea is people really want to make it to the end because once you're the last person left, you can literally just ask for whatever you want and immediately get it. You don't have to do tasks anymore. So, spoiler alert, when the main character wins, she just like lists off 100 different things she wants and she gets them all and it's like the most expensive brands and stuff. And so the idea is like she works like a minimum wage retail job and she lives alone and she doesn't like her life. And so she comes on the show because she's like, yeah, I'm going to have to go through some, tough things. But, I can be on the show and just like get all these nice rewards just for doing simple things like talking to somebody, or once you win you can get it without having to do anything, whereas in the real world like she'd have to she'd have to like spend 2 days worth of her paycheck just to buy that one item. um but then that's where a big part of the commentary comes in that I wasn't expecting, which is even if you genuinely care about someone, even if you genuinely like think you love the person that you're paired up with, that date or whatever in the compound, because you still have the primary goal of winning the game, how do you know for sure that the relationship is 100% genuine? Like even though like the main character, her name's Lily. She in the end she's in love with this guy Sam. And they have some interesting conversations cuz Sam wants to leave. He's not enjoying being there anymore. They like make it to the final 5, which is when like all the rules are lifted and whatever. Um but he doesn't want to win because he loves Lily, but he wants to be with her outside of the compound because he doesn't feel like it's fully real. Um, and Lily is like, "What do you mean? Like, are you saying that this was fake? That this relationship isn't real?" And he's like, "No, but when you're on this game show." It just inherently isn't real because your goal is to win. So how do you know for sure that the relationship like genuinely fully matters to you and you're not like at least a little bit using it to get to the end of the game? Uh, and also with that, uh, freak, hold on. Just in general, like being on a show like that, it even when it reaches the point where you've been there so long, you kind of forget you're on a TV show. It still manipulates your desires. Being on the show kind of decides what you want. It's not like the real world. So this book, instead of being, this like cheesy, dramatic story where a bunch of hot people try to kill each other, it's really a commentary on the artificiality of reality shows, which I've heard people talk about a lot in the sense that like saying that reality shows are fake because a lot of the stuff is scripted. And that's totally valid. But this was actually really interesting to read because it made me think about it in from a perspective I've never really considered as much. Because I've heard plenty of people talk about how, the scriptedness of reality shows, but even the parts of reality shows that aren't scripted, whether it's, a specific portion of a show or like a real show that isn't actually scripted, even then, it is still an artificial environment, and you have different motivators than in the real world. And so going on any sort of show with the purpose of finding love is kind of inherently a flawed concept because you're not in the proper environments to truly feel romance, especially if there's an additional prize in addition to the romance. Like in this case, part of the idea is finding love, but no matter what, whether you find love or not, if you make it to the end, you get, everything your heart desires. And it's the same, like, if there's any reality show where it's like there's love involved, but you also, you're getting fame for being on the show. You potentially are getting paid to be on the show. Like, all these other rewards are also motivators. And in that way, it makes that relationship, at least to a degree, artificial. And until you're out of that experience and back in the real world, you can't know for sure what's actually real. Um, and the ending reflects that idea, and it comes to a point where it's really also commenting on our consumerist society, in that Lily does make it to the end. She's the last person. She asks for all the stuff she wants, and eventually she calls her mom. And she talks to her mom for a while. Her mom didn't really watch the show. Um, but she tells her mom what happened in the show, and that, she loved Sam, but Sam left, and now she gets all this stuff. And her mom is like, "Why are you still there?" And Lily explains that she can stay as long as she wants and she will get whatever she asks for. But the longest anyone's ever stayed is 6 weeks, which is really interesting when you consider that you get literally anything you ask for. The longest anyone, and it sounds like this show's been going on for a long time, the longest that anyone has gone with getting all the material items their heart desires is 6 weeks before they decided to go back to the regular world. That's pretty crazy. That's a month. That's only a month and a half. And and she's like, I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna stay longer than anyone else has, and I'm gonna get all the things ever. And her mom is like, but what about Sam? And she's like, well, he's gone. And her mom's like, well, then it sounds like you didn't really win. And that really changes the way Lily views things. And shortly after that, she ends up leaving. And I think it was only max like a week or a few weeks after she won, um, maybe less. And so in that way, she realizes like she misses her old life, even though she doesn't like everything about it. That humanity and that just there's beauty in reality. Um, there is beauty in the real world, even in the bad things or the things that seem annoying or inconvenient. That's just part of what makes you human. That's part of the experience. And without the dull, you can't appreciate the good. Or you can, but like it helps you to better appreciate it. And so she ends up leaving, and the book ends just right as she leaves, basically. So we have I really like that ending because we understand this realization she's come to, that relationships and life is more important than just getting all the material things your heart desires. But we don't actually know what she does. We can only assume. She probably, I would imagine that she has, a change of heart after this. Um, but you never know. And that's what's very interesting about it, is there's a lot of possibilities for where things could have gone after this. And it's a really interesting development for Lily's character because she's not always the smartest person in the sense that like she can be pretty self-centered. Um, when Sam is like a pretty, logical person, like I'm definitely on his side when he is explaining why he thinks they should leave and, their relationship is more important and all these things. But she doesn't get that because she wants to have, everything she could ever ask for. Um, as far as material items go. And so she's kind of in that way, you're not always totally rooting for her. But that also makes her character more interesting because you see this like different perspective that is a very real perspective. There are a lot of people in our world that are very materialistic, and a big part of that is because of just how our society runs. We're I mean, she is a great example because she works in like she sells makeup. And so she sells all this expensive makeup that she doesn't make enough money to buy herself. And so a lot of people have the same experiences. They work in these jobs where they are selling things that they themselves are unable to afford just to make enough money to try and live. So it's like it's a completely understandable character even if she's not necessarily an ideal role model. Which and so that development is pretty cool to see. So I think that's really the main things I have to say. One other little comparison, but like I don't want this to if you go and read this book, I don't want this to affect the way you what you expect from the book because this could make you just go into it with it could be a similar situation to thinking it's going to be Love Island, but they kill each other and that it'll just kind of be a letdown. But in some ways, this kind of reminds me of the Hunger Games, in sort of in its method of commentary and just a lot of the situations, the strategizing, the forming sides, the people getting eliminated, um, the getting special rewards and deciding like, do you share it with people you trust or do you keep it to yourself? Like, there's a lot of and that's just kind of because they're both games, but still, like, I see some similarities in style and storytelling, which I think is pretty interesting. But overall, just it was a good story. Don't go into there are some eventful moments, but don't go into it expecting some like crazy, dramatic, eventful, like thriller or whatever. It's it's a lot more grounded than you might expect just based on like the concept. It's really just, I mean, there are a few moments that are maybe a bit exaggerated, but nothing out of the realm of possibility. And so it's really just a reality show that totally could exist in our world. Um, and it gives you a lot to think about the nature of reality shows and the relationships formed and why people even go on these shows in the first place and what they get out of it. And so it's a lot to think about, and it's pretty cool. So I'm definitely glad I got to read this one.